is. And we'll get started. So thanks for joining me this evening. My name is Amanda. I'm one of the pre-health advisors in the Pre-Med Health Science Center, and this is our annual DAT Prep Things to Consider workshop. Just before we get started, a little disclaimer that this is not like a DAT prep workshop, meaning you can't attend this and then expect to, jump right into studying or walk into the exam and take it. Like, it won't cover content or anything like that. Wayne State as a university doesn't offer a DAT prep course, but that's part of the reasons that we offer this workshop, so that you have the right information that you would need in order to investigate the best way to prepare for this exam, because it's such an important exam in the whole, preparation process and application process for dental school. We want to make sure that we're bringing you the most up-to-date information about things that you should consider before you kind of embark on this journey of preparation. So what I will cover today, I'm gonna move you guys out of the way so I can see my screen, is I will take a little bit of time to define and describe the DAT, and then talk a little bit more about all of the things that you'll want to consider when you're making some decisions about preparation and when to take the exam. Highlight some do's and don'ts, and then identify the elements of a study plan so that you are going into exam day feeling as solid as you possibly can, or as prepared as you possibly can. And then talk about, why a personalized plan is so important over just kind of using what someone else might give you or worked for someone else. And then I do have some resources to share with you all as well. Why didn't I move? There we go. So the DAT is a dental admissions test. You probably already know that, right? And it exists, right? Dental schools use it for a couple of reasons. One, it's an opportunity for a dental school applicant to demonstrate that they can perform well on a standardized exam, right? This isn't the last standardized exam that you'll take as a pre-dental and then dental student, right? You'll take exams throughout the course of your undergraduate dental education. And then as you move on to boards and licensing, you'll also have to take standardized exams. So they don't stop with the DAT, and the DAT is one way that a dental school can feel good that the applicants that they're taking are going to be able to also perform on these standardized exams that they'll encounter later in their dental education process. The second thing that the DAT does for dental schools is it standardizes applicants, right? It's the only thing that every single applicant for dental school is going to have the same in their application, is a DAT score, right? The way that you take your courses, the order might vary, right? The way that micros taught at Wayne State isn't going to be the same way that micros taught at, U of M or University of Detroit Mercy. So the DAT, because it's a standardized exam and it's administered in these testing centers, is a standardized measure or metric that dental schools are using to compare applicants. Okay, every applicant takes the same test administered by the same company. So what's in the test? It's 4 sections total. You'll take 4 different sections of content, and it'll take you about 5 hours start to stop. That includes kind of checking into the testing center and going through some of the questionnaires at the very beginning of the computerized test so that you can familiarize yourself with the mouse and the way that the setup is. Then the 4 sections are science, which is going to, science questions are going to come from your basic bio, your general chemistry, and your organic chemistry. Then you have math, which is really going to test you on your quantitative reasoning abilities. We talk to students about taking math through 1800 so that they have the solid skills that they need to be able to perform well in the quantitative reasoning section of the DAT. There's a reading comprehension section. If my memory is serving me correctly, there will be 3 different passages, and they are science-based, and then you'll answer about 15 to 17 questions per passage. So they're testing your ability to, interpret the meaning of the text or the passage, reason beyond what the text is asking you, like interpret data potentially. And then the last section is the perceptual ability section. So the perceptual ability section is the only section that you will not take a class at Wayne State that teaches you the content for. This section is all about learning the strategy that's needed to answer these questions and then practicing that strategy. And I have some resources specifically that talk about PAT prep or perceptual ability prep a little bit later on in the presentation. So when it comes down to scoring, you get an instant score when you walk out. It's not official, but you do get to see the breakdown of your scores on a sheet of a score report as you're leaving the testing center. What you're going to see on that score report are 7 different section scores, right? And you're going to see a score for each of the 4 sections that I talked about, right? So science, math, reading comprehension, PAT. They're going to do a total science score, which is what I just described, but then they're also going to break it out into bio and chem and orgo. And then you'll also have an academic average, and your academic average is going to average together your scores for the math, the science, and the reading, and leave out the PAT score. Dental schools are going to pay the closest attention to your academic average and your PAT score. They may look at, your total science, if they're curious about where your academic average comes from. They'll be able to see all of it, but most of them are going to report out on the academic average and then the PAT score when they're reporting on class profiles. Each section can range from 1 to 30. I think Jack Weston's website has a really good explanation of the score breakdown. This mouse doesn't work. That's why it's not working. And so I was going to drop that link in the chat for you guys to pull up and look at later. I don't think it makes sense for me to kind of regurgitate it to you when you can read it yourself, but I thought that this breakdown of the scoring was really helpful when reading it. So I'm going to drop that in the chat right now for you so you can pull it up. So cost of the DAT, right? The cost as of 2023, and I know that we're moving into 2024, but this is the most up-to-date information I could find, is $525. Now that $525 covers the exam itself, the administration, and when you register for the exam, it covers whatever schools you indicate you want your score sent to at that time. So, hot tip, send your score to every single dental school, right? Maybe you stick to just the US schools, maybe you stick to the Canadian schools and the US schools, and obviously that's completely up to you, but send your dental score, your score to every single school, because your school can get the score, but if you don't send your primary application to them as well, then you're not an applicant there, okay? But it is a cost-saving measure, because if you send your score to just, let's say, U of M and UDM, and then you decide that, after evaluating everything, the entire package that you have to present with Doug or myself, right, that those schools aren't a good fit for you, and you need to send your scores to other schools, your official scores, it's going to cost you more money. So it's really best to send your score to every single school when you register to take that DAT, and then just not apply to those schools, because it's going to cost you $525 no matter what. There is a fee assistance program for the DAT, the cost of the DAT. It does not cover the full cost, but it does cover a portion of it. What is really challenging about that is the DAT FAP, or fee assistance program, is available on a first come, first serve basis. So once they've exhausted the amount of money that they have to hand out in fee assistance, they don't have any more for the remainder of the year. So I am dropping a link in the chat so that you can read more about the fee assistance program if you're interested. I would be checking at the very end of the calendar year, so in December, because from everything that I have interpreted over the last 7 years within doing this, the fee assistance money and an application opened in January, and then they hand out those awards again on a first come, first serve basis. So if that's something that you're interested in doing, I would start looking at that link that I sent you now, so you can begin to prepare all the materials that you need for the fee assistance program application. Anybody have any questions at this point? Feel free to unmute yourself. I have the chat pulled up too, so if you want to drop in the chat, you can do that. Cool. All right. So one of the biggest questions that we get from pre-dental students, and Doug can back me up on this, is when should I take the DAT? When should I take the DAT? When do I need to take the DAT? Right. And despite popular belief, there is no set time an applicant has to take the DAT, right? You're going to hear varying stories from people who, who are in dental school or, are practicing dentists now, right? There's a lot of things that you should be taking into consideration as you determine the best time to take the DAT. And what's really nice about the DAT in comparison to the MCAT is you essentially can take it any day of the year, right? The MCAT is a schedule comes out on a yearly basis, and you have to plan your life around the dates that that test is offered. That is not the case with the DAT. You can sign up for it, like 3 weeks before you want to take it. And there will likely be seats at the testing center that you're looking at. So knowing that you have some more flexibility on when you're going to take it, here are the other things that you need to be thinking about. Coursework. Are you through the classes that are going to teach you the content that you need to perform on the exam, right? So we'll have students come in and they're in Gen Chem 1 or Gen Chem 2 planning to take the DAT the following semester, and they haven't been through any Orgo content. If you think back to the sections that I talked to about, you need Gen Chem 1, Gen Chem 2, Orgo 1, Orgo 2, to have all the chem content to be able to study for the DAT. So you need to look at where you're at in your course sequencing. You also need to think about prep time, right? What is the appropriate amount of time to prepare for the DAT? What I've noticed in my 7 years working at Wayne is that Wayne State students in particular are grossly underprepared for this exam. They do not spend the amount of time that they should, and then end up in a position of having to retake the DAT. So when I'm talking about an adequate time to prepare, what is the adequate amount of time to prepare? It's not really like a hard and fast, it needs to be 4 months. It needs to be 6 months. It needs to be, 2 months. I can tell you it needs to be longer than 2 weeks for sure, right? But anyway, so the adequate amount of time to prepare is going to depend on a couple of different things that I'm going to talk about later in the presentation. It's going to depend on coursework, but also the other things that you have going on as you continue to build your application. So I'm going to come back to that TBD. Application timing is something that you should consider. It is the Pre-Med and Health Science Center philosophy that you should know your DAT score before you apply. And we're really starting to hear a lot of dental schools say this too, as they're presenting to students, like, you need to know what your score is, because you could have a really solid GPA and then just have a really bad test day and not score well on the DAT, right? That high GPA does not overcompensate for your low DAT score. Every piece of information in your application has a different function or reason that admissions are looking at it. So you want to have a solid, well-balanced application. So if you submit your application and then go sit for your DAT and your DAT score comes back and it's not great, you're in a really sticky situation. Do you continue to pay all of these supplemental fees when you know that your DAT score is not competitive at these schools? Or are you going to pay these fees with knowing that the chances are not great that you're going to get an interview, right? So if you know what your DAT score is before you start submitting applications, you're submitting to the schools that you have the best chance of getting into. Should I consider retakes in my timing? So no, you should always go into studying for this exam and planning to take it once. Sometimes things happen, right? Sometimes we have really bad test days, even though we have done everything that we know how to do to prepare adequately, right? So in certain circumstances, we do have to retake this exam. If you do plan to take it once and you do take it and it doesn't go well, it's 90% of the time our philosophy that you are waiting to the next cycle to apply then, right? And I know that ADA, or the ADA, I'm sorry, says that a student must wait 60 days before they can retake the exam. But 60 days isn't enough time for you to process the fact that you didn't score well the first time, come up with a new study strategy, and then implement that new study strategy so that you can show growth between your first score and your second score, because that's what dental schools want to see. They want to see that you learned from the first time that you took it and have come up with a new way to prepare for this exam and are able to show that growth in yourself and in your test score. So rushing into a retest is not necessarily the best thing. 9 out of 10 times that I see students do that, it does not work out well for them, and they end up having to take it a third time. And we're talking about almost $1,600 in DAT fees. Sorry, I can't find my mouse to advance to the next slide. Okay, so some DAT do's and don'ts. So when you are thinking about, I'm approaching the end of my coursework, I should start studying for the DAT. I don't want you to dive right in. You shouldn't just grab any book that you can find or any software that you can find and just go, right? You shouldn't also plan to use someone else's method or plan just because it worked for them. We hear it all the time. Oh, I'm just going to use so-and-so's plan because they got a 23 in the DAT and that's what I want too. Newsflash, you are not that other person. There are differences between you and them, academically, personally, mentally, physically, that you're not accounting for when you just plan to use someone else's plan or plan to use a course because someone else used a course and did well, right? And also, I already mentioned this, but don't plan to study for less than a month. A month is not enough time for you to do content review and adequately practice and score well. Okay. Do research your resource options. There are so many out there. If you are at the point of starting to think about studying for this exam, you likely already know that, right? And there's no right or wrong set of resources. You've got to find the resource that's the best fit for you. How do you do that? Assess yourself. What are your obligations outside of continuing your coursework and studying for this exam? Are you also working a part-time job? Are you also volunteering in a community service location? Are you doing research? Are you the president of a student org? What else do you have going on? Because those things shouldn't have to stop just because you are ready to study for the DAT. Studying for the DAT, balancing those commitments, and keeping up with your coursework demonstrates to dental schools that you are very good at balancing multiple commitments and will be able to handle that same situation in dental school, right? Something else you want to assess about yourself are your subject matter strengths and weaknesses. Did you bring in AP credit for Bio 1500 and 1510, right? If that's the case, you probably are going to need to spend a little bit more time going back and reviewing that content because it's been a while since you've looked at it, right? Is chemistry not a strong suit for you? You might want to allow more time to go back and brush up on your Gen Chem and take it slow so that you're retaining the content and not just flying through and memorizing the practice problem answers, right? What are your learning preferences? Do you like online learning, or would you prefer to have a book that you can highlight and write in, right? Do you like to make flashcards, or is using some kind of flashcard software kind of more your jam, right? Those are things that you should be considering too, because you want to set yourself up for success as you're preparing for such a very important exam. You want to create a personalized plan. So taking into account the resources that you've researched and all of the things that you know about yourself, you need to come up with something that's going to work for you. What works for someone else doesn't mean it works for you. And be realistic, right? It is not realistic to think that you're going to study for this exam in 1 month or 2 months and score 22 plus. It's just not. Success on this exam is not just content knowledge, but it's also strategy, knowing what the strategies are to approach these questions in these 4 different sections. The PAT strategy alone is going to take you some time to learn. And then it's also stamina. You have to spend some time sitting at a computer for 5 hours, knowing when you're going to need to take a bathroom break, when you're going to need to take a stand and stretch break. You have got to simulate this exam environment more than once in order to be successful. Okay, so personalized plans ensure you will do the things that we know successful students do. I just mentioned this: content review, practicing test taking strategies, building up stamina. If you do this, the likelihood of you doing well, if you come up with a personalized plan, the likelihood of you doing very well and scoring in the score range that you want to the first time around is very high, as opposed to having to retake the test, which is going to hopefully save you money. Okay, so where do you start with a personalized plan? Couple of different things that you're going to want to think about for yourself. And again, obligations outside of studying, right? What do you have going on? I've already mentioned it. You don't want to stop things. You maybe need to pull back the level of commitment that you have at something, and that's okay, but you shouldn't have to put everything on pause to study for this exam. You shouldn't have to stop taking classes. You shouldn't have to stop working. You shouldn't have to stop volunteering at the place that you're volunteering. Okay. Length of study time. I'm going to dive into how to figure that out and on the next slide. So I'm going to skip over that. And then resources. And I am going to spend a little bit of time talking about the 3 predominant types of resources that exist for DAT prep, and then how you might take a look at what those 3 different resource types are and start evaluating what works best for you. So length of time, right? When you look at this little chart that I made, you've got commitments on the top, right? So this is going to be your part-time work, your shadowing, your dental assisting, your volunteering at multi-clinic, or you're volunteering at wherever you're volunteering, your community service, maybe some of you are in research, maybe some of you are running really successful pre-dental clubs, maybe some of you have a hobby that's really important to you and is something that helps keep your stress levels low. Those are all important things. None of them should have to stop, right? When those are really high, you have a number of high commitments, the amount of free time that we have to build something else in to our like weekly or daily routine is very low. And in that case, the length of time that we're studying is going to be longer. So you're looking at a 4 to 6 month period likely. When we have a low level of commitments, we might be able to, what we do have a higher amount of free time, we might be able to study in a lower amount of time, length of time, right? Students that have high levels of commitment and low levels of free time are the students who might be studying for 2 hours a day for a 6 month period, right? They have, yes, once a week, they might have a longer day so that they can take some full length practice exams. But in general, they've got so much going on that they're going to dedicate 2 to 3 hours a day of content review and then practice questions. And as you know, they get closer and closer to that ideal test date, they're going to be looking at full length practice exams and then reviewing those questions that they got wrong. Students who have a high amount of free time, right? They're not as committed. Maybe they're just working, 10 hours a week and they're shadowing once a week or something like that. They can study for longer periods of time. So we're talking about like 5-6 hours a day for content review and practice questions, and therefore can study in a shorter amount of months, right? So you've got to determine kind of where you fit in this grid to determine how long you should be studying. There's no right or wrong way. Like the students who study for 4 to 6 months aren't necessarily performing better on the exam than the students who study for 2.5 to 3.5 months, right? It's what you do with the time that you have that makes it a success. For example, student comes into my office, Doug's office, they're entering their 3rd year, it's fall semester. They're in Orgo 2 and a bio course this semester. They work part-time as a dental assistant, probably about 20 hours a week. They're also volunteering at Multi-Clinic and Cass Corridor Community Services 1 time a week. So 2 different locations, once a week at each location, right? They are the president of a thriving student organization. The student organization has lots of members, so they're trying to plan lots of events to kind of keep the members engaged. They're also working on an application to participate in a dental enrichment program. This dental enrichment program will meet once a week in the winter semester and offer them like 3 hours of hands-on activities, right? What they really want to do, their goal is to take the DAT before the start of their 4th year, right? So my question to them is, right, do you have any plans to phase out or slow down any of your commitments? And if they're like, yeah, I've been at Malta and Cass Corridor Community Services since my freshman year. I've consistently gone. In the summer, I've even ramped up my hours, right? I don't feel like there's much more I can give there or that I'm going to get out of that. So I plan on phasing those out, right? So I have something phasing out. Save that time, dedicate it to studying, right? They might be able to get through their DAT study in a shorter period of time because they're phasing something out that they no longer feel like is a benefit to them. If the students is not really, like everything that I'm doing is just ramping up. I've only been at Malta and Cass Corridor for 6 months. I just started my dental assisting job. I want to see the organization through as the president through the remainder of this academic year. Then you're going to need to carve out short hour periods of time and plan to study for longer, which means that you might be pushing your DAT day out, right? So again, just kind of showing you how an example or a student might come to this decision-making process so that they have enough time to successfully study for this exam. Go. Okay, so now let's talk about resources. Like I mentioned, 3 predominant types. I've divided those types into these categories. So books, online resources, and then practice tests. Online resources includes courses and software, and then practice tests. It's really important that I say that the Pre-Med Health Science Center does not endorse any of these resources. Like we don't favor one company over another. We will promote anyone who asks us to because everything works differently for everyone, right? It is super important for you to find your fit, right? So it might take you a month to kind of look through some of the book resources that are available to you, right? And the interface that some of these courses use and online software because you want to feel comfortable and good about using it. I will say with the caveat that sometimes finances come into these choices, and I totally understand that. If someone's like, hey, I'm done with my Kaplan DAT books, do you want them? You might choose to use those Kaplan books because they're free, and not because, like then in that case, maybe you just don't look at other book sets, but I understand that finances come into this too. So books, when I say don't make assumptions, I mean, basically like you'll see people post on Student Doctor Network or other forms of social media, like you have to use Kaplan books. I used Kaplan and I got 30 on the DAT. Just because they got a 30 doesn't mean that you'll get a 30, right? The other thing that kind of goes along with assumptions is score guarantees. Some companies will say, if you use our books and our resources, we guarantee a 25 on the DAT. And they can't guarantee anything. And what happens is if you don't score that guaranteed score, they're going to give you the same exact set of resources and tell you to use them again to study. And if they didn't work for you the first time around, chances are you're not going to change up your study strategy that much that they're going to increase your score, right? So you should be doing your research. Get your hands on a set of the books before you make a decision. I also might be looking at what comes with a book set, right? So sometimes you'll get extra Q banks if you buy them in a bundle. So make sure that you're looking at what you get if you're going to buy a set that comes with it. Extra practice questions are never a bad way to go. What's really popular books wise are Kaplan, the Princeton Review, the Gold Standard has a set of books that I don't hear about many of our students using, but I know that they're very popular when it comes to like other advisors talking about them. DAT Destroyer is pretty popular. And then Barron's has a set of books. Barron's are the most expensive, I believe. When I was looking for brand new sets, Kaplan and Princeton Review and the Gold Standard, I don't remember what DAT was, but they all seem pretty reasonable in comparison to one another. So if you were looking to buy a new set, there's that. Where's my mouse? Sorry, I lost it, guys. Okay, so then online resources. When you are investigating online resources like a course that you kind of follow through, right? Or maybe it's a self-paced kind of resource that just has a ton of practice questions that you're going to use. Decide what you need, right? If you are someone who needs the accountability of logging into something every single day and completing a module, then a course might be well worth your time and really placate to your learning preferences, right? If you're someone who's very disciplined and can make their own schedule, then you might look into a software option that provides you with a whole bunch of practice questions that you can schedule on a daily or every other day basis as you're using another resource to do content review, right? Some students just buy everything that they can and then without investigating end up not having enough time to use the things that they buy. Same thing with the books. If you are looking into a course, right, what comes with it? Do electronic versions of the books come with it? Do you get any full-length practice exams? Do you get any free proctored exams? If you do decide to kind of look into a course, take timing into consideration. Usually when students come into our office and talk to us about DAT prep, they have a time of the year that they're looking to take it. So how does that course fit in? Because you can't walk out of a course and walk into the DAT and expect to score phenomenally. You need some time after the course has ended to practice what you've learned in the course before you sit for the actual test, right? And then I've already mentioned the guarantee, but the guarantee is also available, or you see these guarantee with these courses too. Don't let it fool you, right? Make sure you take a look at what's offered to you, that you like the interface, that you find it easy to use and understand before you just dive right in, because they guarantee a certain score that you want. So when it comes to popular online resources, Kaplan and Princeton Review really have like the courses that are kind of promoted for DAT prep. There's a ton more software out there for DAT prep than there is for MCAT. And all of the ones on this list right here are softwares that I know that our pre-dental students have used over the course of the time that I've been working with them. So Chad's videos comes up all the time. If you're looking for Chad's videos, you're actually going to go to coursesavers.com to find them. I believe Chad's videos doesn't include bio content though. So that is something that you would have to supplement if you decided to use the software and website for any kind of either content review or practice questions. Crack the DAT is pretty popular. So is DAT Bootcamp. QVault is literally a resource of practice questions. So if you decide that you're going to do a course and then you want to do extra practice questions, a lot of students will talk about QVault. DAT Booster is another really popular resource that students talk about. And then I always talk about going back to the originator of the exam. And the American Dental Association is the association that writes this exam. So any resources that they have available, those would be on the top of my list to invest in. The American Dental Association does offer some full-length practice exams. I'll talk about that in just a second. So definitely getting your hands on those, because those are going to be the most indicative of the actual thing. And you definitely want to know kind of what it's going to look like before you go into it. So a quick note about the perceptual ability test, right? I said I would kind of talk about a little bit more later on. So it has 6 different types of questions. Question types are keyholes, angle ranking, cube counting, pattern folding, hole punches, and then they call them a TFE or a top front end, right? And these questions are going to ask you to manipulate like angles or, a shape and tell you how many cubes are showing on the left-hand side, or if you dumped a bucket of paint on top, how many sides would actually have paint touch it, right? So there are questions that you are going to make you think, but there are strategies that different people, right, test prep people have come up with that you can utilize, you can learn and utilize in practice to be able to answer these questions very quickly. And I think there's 90 PAT questions. So you've got to be able to answer some of these questions in like 30 seconds, in 40 seconds, right? I did some time on, poking around on YouTube, and I found that these 2 channels, so Mental Dental works with, I think they partner with DAT Booster. And then this other one, I don't know how to say that. Tradition, I guess, maybe, I don't know, Perceptual Ability. Both YouTube channels have videos for each of the 6 types of questions, and they walk you through kind of the strategy that you should be utilizing to approach each of these types of questions. And everything, I've never taken the DAT, I don't ever plan to, but everything that I've read and talked to people about, and they've really stressed that it's about learning the strategy with these questions and then spending a large amount of time practicing answering these questions so that you're able to engage in that strategy in a very, very quick manner and answer these questions as quickly as possible. Okay, practice tests are the 3rd types of resources. These are probably the most important part of the study plan. And students don't probably emphasize these as much as they should in the process, right? Yes, it's important to do content review. Yes, it's absolutely so important for you to do practice questions by themselves in kind of like a Q bank, or, at the end of a chapter when you're reading a book, or the end of a module, right? But practice tests are the ones that are the things that are going to tell you when you're ready to take this exam, right? You should be taking full length practice exams until you are consistently scoring in the score range that you want to score in when you take the real thing, right? So ada.org has a good amount of practice exams available to you for purchase. A lot of courses and software subscriptions will also mention how many practice exams they have available. So as you're doing kind of your resource research, pay close attention to that so you can make sure that you have enough to take so that you know that you're scoring consistently. I would say you should be aiming anywhere between 10 and 12 fully practice exams before you're sitting for the real exam itself. Okay. I wanted to pause because sometimes the students will teach me about resources that I don't know about because I'm not out there on, I'm not out there trying to study for the DAT. So I wanted to pause for a moment and see if there are resources that you guys have heard about that we as an office should investigate. I'm going to take this out and says no. Okay. All right. So we've talked about the things that you need to consider, right? When you're thinking about when you're going to prepare for this exam, and the resources that you need to spend some time investigating so that you're putting together a plan that works the best for you. I kind of just touched on this, but how do I know when I'm ready? We get that question a lot, right? You really need to utilize those practice exams. Relying on the idea that you'll score higher on test day is not a good strategy, right? We'll see students who will come into our office and they're so set on this timeline that they've given themselves. And when we ask them, well, how are you scoring on fully practice exams? They're like, I really am aiming for a 22 and I'm at like an 18, 19 right now, but I know on test day, I'm just going to blow it out of the water. And guess what happens? They don't, right? In fact, a lot of times when we hear students talking, they end up coming back and scoring even lower than what they were getting on practice exams because they weren't ready. So you really do need to rely on that, taking those fully practice exams and scoring consistently in that score range before you sit for the exam. So bottom line, there's no proven best way to study. You will have students will come in all the time. I just want to know what the easiest way to study is. There is no easy way to study for this exam. This exam isn't easy. You have got to be able to roll your sleeves up and dive in and do some hard work to make sure that you're getting the score that you want so that you can apply to the schools that you want to, right? Your goal really should be to get the best score the first time you take it. We don't ever want you going in saying, oh, it's fine, I'll just take it again, because then you've got 2 test scores on your score report. And yes, dental schools will see every time you've attempted to take this exam. So that's what I have. I do have a survey so that I can get that timing from you, because there are a couple of test prep companies that want to come in and offer our students some strategy sessions and some fully practice exams. So if you can either scan this QR code or there's a link to this form in the chat as well, I would appreciate it. And then stop recording. If you have